All right, welcome to 40 Minutes of Competence, number 4. And our assignment this time was to describe the door hardware required for a door that, number 1, connects an office to a corridor. Number 2, connects a bedroom to a corridor. Number 3, connects a classroom to a corridor. And number 4, connects a storeroom to a corridor. So these are different types of locking mechanisms that you need to think about, and it really comes down to kind of 2 questions. It's amazing how many different combinations can be answered with these 2 questions. But number 1, how does it lock and unlock from each side? And number 2, how is egress maintained? Because we want to make sure that if somebody is in, say, a classroom and there's a fire, we want to make sure that they can get from the classroom to the corridor, to the exit discharge. All right, let's see how that's done. Well, these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different common types of lock. And I think you should just learn these, or at least learn how to answer these, or be familiar with these for the exam based on the experience of those who came before you. And so from an office to a corridor, we have to ask, the first question is, where does the locking happen? And so, of course, if the corridor is on the left and the office is on the right, we need to be able to lock an office. That's pretty clear. We need to have a key be the thing that locks or unlocks the office from the outside, from the corridor. We need to have a thumb turn. So just, you don't need a key if you're in your office and it was locked and you want to unlock it and leave. Or if you're in your office and you close the door and you want to lock it, you don't want to have to search for a key. So all you have to do is flip over that thumb turn, and then that locks the outside lever. Now, we also may have a latch bolt as part of this locking assembly, and we want to make sure that from the inside, from the office, that we're not locked out if we can't find the thumb turn, or if the thumb turn is hot because of the fire. We want to make it really easy to leave really quickly. So as is going to be the case in many of these, maybe all of them, the inside lever, now it's drawn here as a knob, but ADA requirements make it that it's more likely to be a lever. I drew it as a knob because a lever kind of looks unusual from that angle and it's a little bit unclear what it is, so I chose to draw it as a knob. But generally we can have a knob in single-family detached residential and other non-public places where accessibility and ADA laws don't apply. But if we're in a public space, whether it be a restaurant or an office or some kind of commercial space, we generally are going to need a lever, because a lever is easier to operate for someone who has disabilities or someone who has arthritis. And I bet even you, sometime in the last 6 or 8 months, have had hands that were full and you've used your elbow to open a lever. So a lever is both easier, and frankly, I think many of us prefer a lever, even if it weren't ADA requirement. It's one of those things like curb cuts that we didn't know we needed until they were available, and then we realized they were kind of handy for all kinds of other things as well. Anyhow, if we turn this lever or this knob, and I'm going to use those 2 interchangeably, we want to make sure that the door opens. This type of lock hardware is called an office entry lock or an inner entry lock. So that's the name of it. As you might imagine, there are multiple names for some of these, but it's used for an office and it's called an office entry lock, and that's pretty easy to remember. Now, when I talk about this kind of locking hardware, I'm kind of talking about this. So there's going to be a lever. This is maybe a better way to draw a lever than I had. And it looks something like this. And so we're going to mortise out the door. We're going to kind of carve out the door from the edge, and we're going to put all this hardware in, and then we're going to attach to it. Attach to that hardware through the front of the door, and it looks something like this. So we're going to take a door. Now, if we buy a door that's pre-hung, it's going to already be mortised out, and pre-hung is just what it sounds like. There's a door casing, and it turns out it's pretty difficult to make a door. You'd think it would be pretty easy, but the quality of to make a good door that opens and closes smoothly and stays that way for years, turns out everything has to be not just level, but insanely level. And one of the ways we can maintain quality control is to have a pre-hung door. They come with straps around them so that they're not warped or damaged during shipping. The other option, which gives you much more design flexibility, is to have a door slab. But a door slab would not have anything pre-mortised out. But you can use an antique door with a door slab. You can kind of make your own great door. If you are ever in need of a door idea, I highly recommend you Google Stephen Hull doors. I think he's my go-to architect for kind of thinking about how a door could be. Anyhow, or if you want to see how a door is mortised out, you can just Google door mortising, or you can go to this particular website. I'll wait for a second so you can take a phone photo of it. All right. Now I want to, and of course I'll have all of this on, we have a website now that has all of these. So if you're on our mailing list, you'll get a link beginning probably tomorrow or Saturday. Probably tomorrow, maybe Saturday, depending on how quick things come back. But you'll get a link to our YouTube playlist that's going to have that has all of these on them. And if you're not on our mailing list and you want to be on our mailing list, we don't send a lot of emails. We try to minimize, and we only ever give. We're not interested in taking from you, so we're never going to ask you to do something. We just like to give. So you'll want to email firms@amber-book.com. All right, back to the question at hand. The next one was connecting a bedroom to a corridor. So here we have the corridor on the left. We have the bathroom or bedroom, because this is called a bath or bedroom privacy lock. So I drew it as a bathroom over here, but in reality it could be a bedroom as per our discussion or our question. And in a bedroom, we don't want any way to lock it or really unlock it from the corridor. More on that in a second. Because we never want a situation where we're going to lock our bedroom from the outside. But there are lots of cool situations where we want to lock our bedroom from the inside, and probably some not so cool situations. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to have a thumb turn, because you don't want to have to search for a key when you want to lock your bedroom from the inside. And we also want a situation where we don't want to have to unlock the thumb turn just to leave. If we want to leave, we want to leave. So when we turn the knob or the lever, it's automatically going to unlock the door. Furthermore, if we happen to open the door, then turn the thumb turn to lock the door, and then went out to the hallway, and then we closed the door, we wouldn't want to be locked out of our bedroom for that simple mistake. So anytime the door is closed, it automatically unlocks the corridor lever or knob. So that automatically unlocks. Therefore, it can't be locked unless it's closed first and then you turn the thumb turn. Now, every once in a while, though, you'll have a situation where, for whatever reason, somebody locked it and then went out the window or something like that. Who knows? There may be some weird situation where you are actually locked out of your bedroom. And in that case, there is actually a place for a special key, or often a screwdriver can just be inserted and you can turn it. So it's kind of a non-key key. So in extreme situations, if you go to the toolbox, you can still get into your bathroom or into your bedroom. So again, we have no key on the corridor side. We have a thumb turn on the bedroom side. We have a mechanism in there where if you turn the bedroom side knob, you can automatically unlock the door. And if the door is open when it's locked and then it gets closed, it will automatically unlock. That is our bath and bedroom privacy lock. All right, next one. Connecting a classroom to a corridor. So here we have the corridor on the left. We have the classroom on the right. And so from the corridor, we want a way to be able to lock the classroom. The teacher has to be able to leave the classroom and lock it, But you don't want the students to lock the classroom from the corridor, obviously. So there's going to be a key to lock or unlock the classroom from the corridor. And of course, we want to maintain egress. The last thing we want to do is trap a bunch of students inside of a classroom during an emergency. So anytime the classroom knob, or more likely lever, is rotated, it will automatically unlock the classroom to provide the necessary egress. Now you'll note there's no way here to lock the door from the inside of the classroom, and that's because generally we didn't, and I say that in past tense intentionally, we didn't want students to lock teachers out. We didn't think that would be very funny. So we couldn't imagine a scenario where somebody would want to be in the classroom and still want to lock it. So we didn't have that option. Now, as you can imagine, things have changed. I think actually last month was the first month in like 20 years where there wasn't a school shooting. So people are now concerned with school shootings. So now we have a new type of classroom. It's called a classroom security lock, new type of door hardware, and it's pretty much the same thing. Here's the corridor on the left and the classroom on the right. And we have a key on the corridor side so that we can lock the door when we're done with it at the end of the day, and we can unlock it in the morning. And we have the knob or lever on, more likely lever on the classroom side that allows for egress, so even if it's locked for some reason, the students and the teacher can get out. But now there's a key in this security lock version of the classroom lock. There's a key to be able to lock it from the inside. Note, it's not a thumb turn because we don't want the students to be able to lock out their friends or the teacher. But if there was an emergency like a school shooting, we want the teacher to be able to find the key and lock the door from the corridor, so to protect the classroom. Our next question was to connect what kind of hardware do we need to connect a storeroom to a corridor? This one's pretty interesting. The corridor again is on the left and the storeroom is on the right. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make this outside lever, the one on the corridor, we're going to make it inoperative, because generally we don't have to go in and out of a storeroom like all the time. So we don't want, and we certainly don't need it to be operatable. It's either going to be unlocked and you're going to take a bunch of stuff out of the storeroom or put some stuff in the storeroom, or it's going to be locked. There's never a situation really where we want the storeroom to be easily accessible. So what we're going to have is we're going to have a situation where it's unlocked by the key in the corridor, and the inside lever automatically unlocks it because we don't want people trapped in a storeroom overnight or something if someone closes it. It's actually what happened to my grandfather. He was a butcher, and on Friday afternoon someone used a padlock and accidentally locked him and a colleague inside the freezer, and then they were in the process of kind of wrapping up for the weekend. So I certainly wouldn't have been here. My grandfather was pounding on the door. The man who had locked them in heard them, fortunately, and so they didn't freeze to death. And then the next Monday, my grandfather installed a telephone in the freezer. It's probably the only walk-in freezer in New York City that had a telephone in it. But that was in the meatpacking district before the meatpacking district was used for something other than meatpacking. Anyhow, so when you're inside, you need to be able to get out. So you need to maintain egress. And of course, there's never a situation where you would be inside a storeroom and want to lock other people out from inside. That only really would happen from outside. So there's no way to control the lock on the inside of the storeroom. Now there are other types as well. This one's called a passage latch. And this one is something where it doesn't lock, there's no lock at all. It doesn't lock from either side. So there's a lever or a knob on one side, a lever or a knob on the other side. And it's also called a closet latch because it's for something like a closet where you don't necessarily ever need to lock the door for, say, a bedroom closet. This is the first of two that are electrically locked. In other words, we can have somebody with a button that's sitting maybe a few feet away that can press a button, and the button will unlock the door. So what happens is we have this is outside on the left, and this is inside on the right. And of course, from our inside door knob, we need to be able to maintain egress. So if we turn that knob, it's going to let us out. From the outside, we can access the door either from a key, or again, there's a 24-volt AC or DC current, and somewhere there's an electrical switch for like somebody to let you in or out. And it's called, this particular version flavor is called an electrically locked fail-safe. And the reason it's fail-safe is if the power goes out, you can still get in the building. In other words, the power is what's keeping it locked. When the power goes out, it becomes unlocked, and you can still get into the building if the power goes out. Now, as you might imagine, there are some buildings that we don't want to be reliant on the power grid to make sure that no one can get in. So in that situation, we have an electrically locked door, but we have one that's called fail secure. And again, we have a way to get in with a key from the outside. We have a way to leave without a key from the inside easily. But we have this electrical current coming through, and that electrical current means that if the power goes out, the door stays locked. So the power is what's keeping it unlocked, but when the power goes out, the door gets locked, and that's called a fail secure. And so that's pretty easy to remember, secure. And if you go to websites of the folks who sell hardware, you can see that you have these options. You have an office lock, and you have a bath and bedroom privacy lock, and so forth. And there are other options as well. These are the ones I would like you to focus on for the exam now, these 8. All right, now, this is our problem for our next exam. So as always, we're going to go over a problem, then I'll give you a problem for our next exam. I probably shouldn't call it an exam, that sounds scary. Let's call it our next meeting, our next 40 minutes of competence Zoom call, which happens every week, but 2 hours earlier than this one. We of course postponed this one because of the NCARB, the NCARB Zoom call. There was actually a question that came up in the NCARB Zoom call, and that's the one I'm going to answer after this. Thought it was a pretty good question. Most of the chat comments in the NCARB Zoom call were kind of embarrassingly mean. I copied and pasted them, and there were like 18 pages of them. You folks are pretty tough on NCARB. I think there's a lot to be tough on them for, but I wouldn't say that customer service or being greedy are the two things that NCARB is doing wrong. They're actually really dedicated to customer service, and they're not taking your money the way it's very expensive to take these tests, but believe it or not, they lose money on every test. So the test that you pay for is $210. It costs them more than $210 for you to take the test. How do they make up for that? They make up for it with your fees when you're not taking a test. So to keep your NCARB record, you have to spend, $50 a year or something, and that makes up for the difference. So they're not greedy, and they are trying to help in general. Now there's all kinds of other things that we can be critical of them for, but I'm not going to do that here. All right. Now, for next week, we have a wall. Actually, we have 2 walls, wall A and wall B. Wall A has sound transmission loss, or TL, of 60 decibels in the opaque portion, and 5% of the surface of the wall is covered by window, and the window portion has a transmission loss of 25 decibels. Wall B has a sound transmission loss of 40 for the whole assembly. There is no window in wall B. Which will do a better job keeping passing bus noise out of the apartment, wall A or wall B? So wall A has a transmission loss of 60, and it has a window that covers 5% of the wall surface in wall A, and that window has a transmission loss of 25 decibels. And for reference, 60 is a very robust wall, and 25 is a pretty typical window. Wall B is just an opaque wall. It has no window in it. It's not nearly as robust. It has a transmission loss of 40 decibels. So the question is, which one of them will do a better job keeping the bus noise out of the apartment? And for that, it's helpful to have this graphic. You can take a phone photo of it now if you want to work on it at home. I'll also, of course, in our email, I'll send you a link to this graphic as well so you can use it. And I'll wait a second for you to take the phone photo. All right, this is the part of the class where you're encouraged to leave if you're going to go study right now, but if you're not going to study right now, you should probably stay. It's actually a pretty worthwhile, I think this is a pretty worthwhile question to answer for you guys because this is a one that I think is very confusing, and actually NCAR probably deserves a little bit of scorn for this, and that is your fail report. Now some of you guys have failed an exam division before and you got a fail report and it looks something like this. This particular one happens to be for PDD, I think. Maybe it's PPD, I can't remember which now. I think it's PDD. But anyhow, what it has is it has your performance, and it has, for these different content areas, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, it has how well you did. So this particular person did level 3 in content area 1, integration of building materials and systems. He did level 2 in content area 2, construction documentation. He did level 4 in content area 3, and in content area 4, he did level 3, and level 2 in content area 5. Now, what does that mean? Well, the levels are explained here. Level 1 means that it exceeds minimum performance necessary. Level 2 means it meets minimum. Level 3 is not quite as good, and level 4 means you're well below the performance necessary to demonstrate competency. And so one would look at this and one would be forgiven for thinking that in order to pass this exam next time, you have to bring all of your scores in all 5 areas. You have to bring them to level 1 or level 2. It seems like those are the blue ones. One of them says you meet the minimum performance, and one of them says you exceed it. So it would seem like you would think that you would have to bring them all to level 1 or level 2. In reality, that's not true. You can pass with all but one of them in level 2. Level 3, and the rest, and the last one in level 2. So every question is worth 1 point. It does not matter what section it comes from. Every question is worth 1 point. And you don't pass based on how many questions in a given area you get right. You pass based on how many total questions, how many total points you get. So if the cut score for your particular exam is, say, 68%, that means you have to get 68% of the questions correct, regardless of what sections they come from. And so you may get all of the questions wrong for one level, for one content area, and all of them right for another content area. It doesn't matter as long as you get, in that particular case, as long as you get 68% of them total right, then you pass the exam. Some of you guys don't believe me. Trust me, I know more about this test than anybody in the world. I will tell you that is absolutely true. There are rumors online that NCARB says that's true, but it's really not. Why on earth would they lie about this? If that's what they need, what you need to pass, why wouldn't they tell you what score you need to pass? Anyhow, so you'd say, okay, so what good is it? Well, in theory, it would be good, and frankly, in ARE 4.0, it was pretty good because in the content areas, it would tell you what area you needed to study. So in ARE 4.0, it may say something like plumbing, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm not doing well at plumbing. So in theory, if you get a level 4, you might say, okay, I need to actually focus on content area 3 because I got a level 4 in it. But in actuality, because everyone is worth 1 point, what you really want to look at is this column here, the percentage of the scored items that come from that particular section. So, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean, okay, it looks like you did really poorly in content area 3, but content area 3 only accounts for about 13% of the total questions that are in the exam. Meanwhile, you also did pretty poorly on content area 1, not as badly. You got a level 3 there, but that's a full third of the exam is from content area 1. So if every question is worth 1 point, it may be worth studying content area 1 to get that higher because it's worth more on the exam than content area 3, even though you did worse on it. Is that confusing? No, I don't think so. I think you probably get it. Now, but even after you decide that, let's say you've decided you're going to study content area 1. If you look at content area 1, and this is where NCARB kind of flubbed it, I think, it says integration of building systems and materials. How the hell would you study something so broad as integration of building materials and systems? That is literally probably 700-800 concepts that you would have to own in that category. So in reality, it's really useless. It's really useless. I would say that these fail reports are useless. Now, they're useful in that if you got all level 4s, we need to have a talk, you need to give me a call. If you got something that looks like this one, you may think you did really poorly, but actually you really didn't. On the 2 big ones that represent about 3/4 of the exam, content area 1 and content area 2, you got a level 2, which is minimally passing, and you got a level 3, which may be 1 point, maybe 1 question below minimally passing. So you may have actually done quite well on this test. And then if you look at area 3 and 4 and 5, well, you can see right here, 5 at 2 to 8%. That's not even worth dealing with. So even if you did well or poorly, there's really nothing you're going to study with that. Yeah, you did poorly in content area 4, but man, codes and regulations, that is a lot to study for just 8 to 14% of the test. So that might not be worth studying. And we already talked about content area 3, also manual and specifications. How the hell would you study that anyway? So you may look at this and think, oh, this person failed pretty miserably. But in reality, this could literally have been a point away from passing. So I would not, if I was this person, I would, as soon as I found out that I failed and I saw this fail report, I would reschedule. I would reschedule for as soon as possible. So I would schedule for within, for the soonest available appointment. And by the way, all of you guys should be scheduling your tests because Amber Book won't be free anymore pretty soon, probably at the end of this month. And you want to get a test as soon as possible so that you don't have to pay us. We don't want you to pay us if you don't have to. And also, you should start scheduling the test because everyone's going to run to schedule the test soon. And it's good if you have an available test, even if you have to drive a ways for it. I would definitely schedule your spot on Prometric. Now, we can say horrible things about Prometric. I think that is the worst. My experience with them is the worst. So if you want to kind of rip on people, I think you should rip on the Prometric people. But what an awful company. But for the NCAR people, I don't think they're quite that bad. All right. Now, if you are not sure if you passed or if you're not sure if you passed or failed the exam, if you're not sure if you passed it miserably if you're not sure you failed it miserably or just failed it and should retake it soon. If you're not sure, you failed it and should retake it soon. So if it's a toss-up, take it soon. You will be thankful that you did. These exams have pass rates that average 58%. If you are an average person, that means you have less than a 3% chance of passing all of the exams on the first try. Even if we can get you to 80% likelihood for each of these exams, you still have less than a 50% likelihood of passing all of the exams on the first try. So failing is a feature, not a bug. And failing like this is a big part of the exam, and you just schedule it again and give it another crack. You're allowed to retake, as you probably know. You're allowed to retake no sooner than 60 days after you take an exam and fail it, and you're allowed to take an exam 3 times in 1 year before you're told you can't take anymore. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to I'm not going to say goodbye, we'll talk. So I'm going to allow you guys to unmute yourselves in a second. Those of you who want to go start studying, go for it. Those of you who have to go make dinner, go for it. Those of you guys who just are kind of aimlessly wandering around through the whole quarantine because you're not sure what to do with your time, go aimlessly wander around. And for the rest of you guys, stick around and I will answer questions as they come to me. Not so much from the chat, I answer those next week, but if you have a question you want to unmute yourself in a minute and ask a question, I will field those questions. You should be able to unmute yourself now. I can, I'm going to turn you up a little bit. All right, say again. I can hear you. Go ahead and talk again. Yes. Yeah, go ahead and ask your questions if you have them. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it is a good strategy. It's one of the comments we get the most. In general, my experience and that of other people, with the exception of the recent push for more moment and shear diagrams, which is what we covered in the second and third week. So if you weren't here, you can look at those. There generally is very little structures in this exam. So I had, of the 600 questions on this, yes, we can hear you. Of the 600 questions, of the 600 questions that you'll find on the exam. Oh, am I muted? Got it. I did that again. You can hear me now? Okay. Ironically, when I unmute you, I mute me. and I'm starting to understand why. It's because I have 2 computers going, one so I can draw on it, and one so I can kind of quickly unmute people or whatever I need to do, read chat. And so when I unmute you on one computer, I actually wind up muting me on the other one. And so I went through, you asked a good question, and then I answered you, and I was having a whole conversation with you, and you weren't hearing me. So let me answer your question. The question was, when we're talking about structures, the Amber book seems kind of light on structures, and that is very intentional. So I was invited to the first ever NCARB Invitational. This is back in 2016, March of 2016, maybe 15 actually. And one of the things they did is they kind of went through all of the changes that were going to happen to 5.0, from 4.0 to 5.0. In 4.0, there was an entire exam for structures, and in 5.0, there of course is not. And someone raised their hand and said, and actually that someone, to be frank, was me, and said, so it sounds like the main difference between 4.0 and 5.0, it's all the same questions, only there's way less structural content and more business of architecture content, accounting and law of architecture. And Jared, who was just on this call that NCARB had, said, yes, it's exactly right. Since then, I've taken 5.0 and many other people have, and people are generally shocked at how little structures content there is. Now, lately, I've been getting comments from people saying, well, there was, with regard especially to shear and moment diagrams, there was some real structures content that required a slightly deeper meaning of the metrics of structures. And so that's why I covered that on the second and third of these calls, and that's why we're making a video for that. So we're adding a little bit more structure, but I focus on yield. And by yield, I mean how many more questions can you get right per hour of studying? And there is a lot to study in structures, and there are very few calculation questions on these exams in my experience. So it is not a good use of your time to study structures, given that every question is worth 1 point. Now, it is a great use of your time to study structures, period. I think it's a great use of your time. I think structures is very interesting to study, and I think it's totally relevant. I know people always say, well, structural engineers do all this anyway. I don't think that's true. I think an architect lays out the rhythm of the building, and I actually, when I'm king, I'm going to put way more structures questions on this exam, and then I'll cover way more structures content in the videos. But you go to war with the army you have, and the current regime has not much structures, embarrassingly few structures questions, so we have only a limited amount of structures content. Other questions?
Michael, I have a question about the score report.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind sharing this. On my last attempt for PPD, I got, in 3 sections, I got level 3, and in 2 sections, I got level 2. So I'm trying to understand what you're recommending. It's not like I have to focus on one area. It's more of just trying to kind of get that next question if you're like that close.
Exactly. You have basically you should be taking that test again right away, because it's quite I mean, if you could, that's right, if you could, it's quite possible that you missed it by 1 point. And it's quite possible that if you took that exam again, you would fail again by three points, but you may pass it by 3. And the thing is, no one ever gets a pass report. So everyone who passes it thinks they did exactly the right amount of everything, and everyone who fails it thinks that they really got screwed on one particular area. When in reality, it's much more likely that if you passed it, you probably barely passed it. So in other words, you probably passed some other exams that you barely passed, but in your mind, you did everything you needed to do exactly right. But if you took those again, you may fail them, some of those. So you need to think of these as probabilities, that you can get to a 60% chance of passing or a 75% chance of passing. And of course, it's impossible to know how far whether you have a 75% chance of passing. But you have a feeling about these things. And my sense is that people generally are a little tough on themselves. They generally think they're not going to pass or didn't pass, and then do a little bit more often than they think that they definitely aced it and then they didn't pass it.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Anybody else? And again, anything that's on chat, I'll look it over and I'll answer some of those next week, but I may not answer them all. So if you have an important one that you put on chat, you may want to ask it now verbally.
Hi, Michael. This is Rita. I have a quick question.
Yes.
For area number 5 for construction cost estimate, would you recommend that we should study for that area? Even though it's a small percentage, but myself and along with others that I know, we got a pretty low level on that one, like a 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So your guidance or your advice would be much appreciated.
Yeah, so again, I don't recommend, given that it's worth so little, it's, construction cost estimating is an entire field. There's actually 15,000 construction estimators in the country right now. That's what they do for their living. Like that's actually their living is they do cost estimation. That number incidentally is going down because we're having more and more people are able to do it themselves with kind of BIM plugins and that kind of thing. But to spend a lot of time doing construction cost estimating, given that it may be 1 or 2 questions for an entire exam. So this is like 90 or 120 questions on the exam. So say there's 100 on a typical exam. This one has 120. So 2 to 8% literally means 1 or 2 questions out of all of them. And one of them may be easier when you know anyway, and it's quite likely that the other one won't be what you studied anyway. Now, if you're like me, if you're one of the 1 in 6 people who actually enjoy studying, then I would go to the construction cost estimating people have their own AIA. I forgot what the name of it is, but they have their own kind of AIA. So I would either go to them and see what resources they have, or I would go to a local college architecture program or just construction management program and see if you can take a cost estimating class. There are certainly there are established textbooks for this area. I don't know of any I can recommend, but there's one that we use here. I don't know what it is. But there are a few things that I can tell you now that are probably worth knowing. If you're talking, and this is actually a lot of the content on the test kind of covers what I'm about to tell you. So this is actually good stuff I'm going to tell you. So if you're doing something in concrete, it's the cost is all about the formwork, because you have to basically build the building with formwork before you pour it, and then you have to get like a structural engineer to stamp the formwork. It's insane. So you have to make a whole building out of wood, then to pour it out of concrete, and then you have to make, then you have a building out of concrete. And so if you can reuse the formwork, or if you can make the formwork simpler, or if you can have fewer corners or niches, or certainly the kind of corners where you kind of paint yourself into a corner, they call it, I think, recumbent corners. Those are, if you can eliminate that, then you can reduce the cost of concrete. For brick, the cost of brick goes up substantially, again, if you have more corners. Corners are very expensive in brick. So generally in brick, if you have fewer corners, you have less cost. In insulation, rigid insulation and mineral wool is more expensive generally than cellulose or fibrous insulation like glass fiber. What other areas? For wood, wood that is quarter sawn is more expensive than wood that is plain sawn. And quarter sawn, well, that's a whole nother discussion, but you can Google quarter sawn and plain sawn wood, or you can look it up in the wood section of the Amber Book. I'm just kind of going through things. Just kind of going through parts of a building. Windows are generally windows and doors and kind of weird things in buildings are very expensive relative to other things. Mechanical systems are expensive. They're about 12% of the cost of a building. Ductwork, when it's more complicated or convoluted or complex, is more expensive. So generally the things that you think are cheaper generally are cheaper. Whether concrete or steel is less expensive depends a lot on the current price of concrete and steel, and depends on the building, and it depends on the other things you have to do. So it could be, for instance, that steel is cheaper, but because of your occupancy type and building size, for a steel building you have to sprinkler it, and that would be much more expensive than doing concrete. Generally, anything that has to do with cabinetry and systems is expensive. Any foundations that are deep become very expensive. That's a big one that they ask about and that you should know anyway. So if if you can have a shallow foundation, you can save a ton of money. I think it's really interesting that we will walk past this hole in the ground and we'll say, what are they doing? There's a lot that goes on in making foundations, and the easier you can do with that. If your foundation is up against another building that's being occupied or being used at the time, that's much more expensive. If your foundation is deep enough where it's getting filled up with water because the water table is high, that's very expensive. So those are all expensive. And then of course, if you're going to use expensive materials like copper or stainless steel, of course that becomes very expensive as well. Hardscape is pretty expensive. If you do a whole bunch of landscaping that involves a lot of hardscape outside, that's actually pretty expensive too, more than you would think. So if you keep all of that in mind, I would say that's about what you need. I would say that's about what you need to know. That's not what you need to know. You need to know more. And actually, you know, what architect wouldn't be better at their job if they knew more about what things cost? I mean, I can't imagine how many times we specify things that we think cost a normal amount and they cost a lot. And actually, at one point, I remember one time, you know, this was in a really rural area down here. I specified pigmented concrete, and it came in at twice. They doubled the price of the concrete just for the pigment. And I was like, wow, pigmented concrete's really expensive. And I was talking to a concrete guy because I always, when I find out something like that, I always want to find out why. So later, years later, I was talking to a concrete guy and I said, why is pigmented concrete so much more expensive? And he said, what are you talking about? It's hardly more expensive at all. And I said, is that just you or is that everyone? He said, that's everyone. And I explained what happened, and he said, oh yeah, the guy had probably never, you know, if you're in a rural area, he had probably never pigmented concrete before, and he didn't know what to charge, so he just doubled the price of the concrete. So even things sometimes that where we think we're not being expensive and we're told we are, but then maybe we weren't. We just you know had a contractor who wasn't sure how to do something. So that's another thing. Is generally if you can build it in a way that contractors in your region at your time are building buildings anyway, then it becomes much less expensive. Some of you guys know, if you've gone through the Amber book, that I built a addition to my house that's made of bubble wrap. That was very expensive. It was very expensive, and nobody would give me a fixed cost. I had to do it in time plus materials because nobody knew what it was going to cost to build out a bubble wrap. Even though I voluntarily said I will sign something indemnifying you, like if it leaks or burns or doesn't work, it's not your fault. I'm trying something experimental. The risk should be with me. Even with that, nobody would give me a firm price. So anytime you're doing something out of bubble wrap or something weird, that will also be expensive. Other questions?
Excellent, thank you.
My question is more on your perspective on, in your videos, you know, it says try to take your test right after you cover the material. Given the testing facilities are closed, the goal is to continue to study, but if it's prolonged, how, I guess, like, how
Yeah,
does that come?
right? I don't know. I mean, I don't want you to have to pay me any more than you have to pay me. We charge a bunch of money because animations are really expensive, like really expensive. Like the people who are doing this prep stuff and who are not animating, the animation's probably between 90 and 95. Not probably, I can tell you for a fact. In terms of our costs, our animations are between 90 and 95% of the cost of making these things. And so, even though these are simple animations and we're not Pixar, but I don't want to charge anyone who shouldn't have to pay. If at the end of this, my advice to you would be, if at the end of this free period for Amber Book, you feel confident that you kind of understood it. I don't mean that you memorized everything, but you feel confident that you kind of understood it. Maybe you should make sure you don't pay us. You should cancel your enrollment. If you are not feeling confident, then you have one test left, and it's a big one like PPD or PDD, and you got a slot in July. Maybe it's worth keeping us for another month in that situation. But I don't have any advice. Of course, in a ideal world, my strong advice is to take the course and then wrap up the course and take all 6 exams right away, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in 4 days, in right after, you know, and all in one week right after you finish the course. But for almost all of you for almost all of you who are trying not to pay anything for it beyond when the testing centers open up, that's going to be difficult. That doesn't mean it's lost. I don't think that at all. I think if you could quantify it, I think taking the test right away, let's say that's worth 100 points. I think taking it 2 months later is maybe 80 points. You know, kind of maybe you get 80% or even 90%. So I don't think it's lost. I just have seen so many people study for tests, wait too long to schedule it, and then they forget everything or they just life gets in the way. So my strong advice for taking it right away is based mainly on my experience talking with people who just waited too long, and doesn't really apply to this situation because this situation is just crazy and we just got to figure it all out. So I would say take it for as soon as possible. Look at your financial situation. Look at how you feel about it. Decide how you feel about failing. You know, if it's like your rolling clock is about to expire and you have one test left, then that's a little bit different than if you're just starting out and you have lots of rolling clock. And of course, if you like to read, in the first one, I sent out a list of all the, and you can email firms@amber-book.com for this list. I sent out a list of, you know, advisable reading. So that's a less expensive way to continue to study. It's just a lot of reading. I mean, we're talking about literally 5,000, 6,000 pages of reading. And some of it's good reading and some of it not so much. But if you're like me and you like this stuff, then you know, then do it, man.
I guess because I was a member before, so
Mhm.
the month off is a nice thing. But I guess, like, do I just re-review the videos right before my test?
Yeah,
Like, if it
that's what I would
runs
do.
out?
That seems reasonable to me. I think that would be what I would do if I was in your shoes. I mean, now some of you guys remember everything I say in the videos. So if that's you, maybe then you go on to Hyperfine or something like that. But if you don't remember, if you feel like you don't remember that much from the videos, but you feel like you got a lot out of them, yeah, I would get it for 1 month right before. And if you want to make sure you only get it for 1 month, you can sign up for Amber Book and then you can cancel it right away, and you still get it for that month. You know, you pay for that month, you get that month. It's not like when you cancel it, you don't get access to it. If for some reason you go beyond by a few days, just, you know, let us know. We'll give you a refund. It's not like if you miss it by a day, we're not interested in sucking every dollar from you. That's not how we roll. So don't worry too much if it goes beyond by a day, or maybe you forgot to cancel it but you haven't used it in a week. We can see if you used it or you're not. So if you tell us, oh, I noticed on my credit card statement that Amberbook got charged. I have not used it for the last 2 weeks, and so I really shouldn't have had to pay for this month. Just let us know and we'll refund you.
Okay.
Our goal with making this free wasn't really to make sure that you had Amberbook use right up to the point where you took the test. Our goal was to kind of put everything on pause so that everyone could just kind of use this time to study if they wanted to for free. And we also wanted to de-risk it for you, because at the time we made it free, people kept asking us, when do you think the testing centers are going to open up? And of course we didn't know. So it just seemed like, well, why should the risk all be on you guys? That you don't know when you're going to be able to test. We should be able to take, in my opinion, we meaning everyone, everyone in the world should be, the NCARB and Prometric and us and our competitors, everyone should be able to kind of take some of the risk on themselves, so that all of the risk doesn't have to go to one group of people. And that's what we're trying to do here, is just take some of the risk off of you guys.
That works.
Michael, I've got one question on the score report that you've got up.
Yep.
The score report that you have up is for PDD.
Mm-hmm.
And even though NCARB doesn't kind of apply between the integration of building materials and systems, do you have your own recommendations how to prioritize content that's in that large section,
Yeah.
like 37%.
That's in this one?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean the Amber Book. um, no, I mean the a lot of those questions are going to be from two books, literally taken right from two books. One of them is Mechanical and Electrical Equipment for Buildings. That is an exceptionally difficult book for people to read. It's a great reference book, but it's very difficult for people to read to learn. Um, but many of those questions will be literally ripped right from that book, from the tables and the photographs and the illustrations and the diagrams. So get familiar with the diagrams in that book. That's a great use of your time. By getting familiar, you don't have to memorize them. That's not how NCARB doesn't do that anymore. In 4.0, I mean, NCARB 5.0, I'm telling you, man, these NCARB people, they inherited a mess and they are working, man. ARE 4.0 was like, for those of you guys who did it, you know, ARE 4.0 was like architecture trivia. It was like, how much can you memorize? And ARE 5.0, they've moved away from that. And that may make the test more difficult for some of you, but it makes studying for it way better because you can learn the concepts. So, so you'll want to look at those and be like, what concept is this diagram trying to show me? And do I understand it? So I don't have to memorize that this is a valve, but I should be able to know it's a valve because of where, because it sits upstream of a hot water heater and it's a little symbol. And of course you would want a valve upstream of a hot water heater so you could turn it off. So you want to be in that kind of space for MEEB. For fundamentals of building construction, there are a lot of questions on that content, but it's not so much on the photos and the diagrams. A lot of you guys recommended the Architect's Handbook. No, what did you recommend? Someone help me out. Which, and that wasn't the Green Building Construction. Which is the one? Oh, the Studio Companion. That's what it is. The Studio Companion. And so I'll have to look at that. I've read that book, of course. It's been a while since I looked at it. I'll have to look at it again, kind of with fresh eyes, thinking about the ARE and think about how useful that book is in terms of diagrams and that kind of thing. But everyone seems to say it's useful, and when everyone says something, it's usually true. So if Amazon reviews have taught me one thing, it's that when everyone says something, it's usually true. You're going to get a toy for your kid. All the reviews say it's a great toy, but it's really hard to change the batteries, and you're like, why are people writing about why it's so hard to change the batteries? And then you go and you love the toy, and then the batteries run out, and you go and change them, and you're like cursing at the toy because the batteries are so hard, and you're like, oh right, they told me that. So generally, if everyone says it, it's got to be true. And so I think that would be a good one too. I think Fundamentals of Building Construction is a fantastic book. It was my textbook in school. I did not realize what a great book it is. It is a really, really fun read, and I highly recommend it for all of you guys.
Great, thank you.
And I'll take one more question. Anything else?
Hey Mike, this is me again. Quick question. I know that now that our tests got pushed back and we all want to study and pass exam for next time, but I find that a lot of times we are not as motivated as before we have a deadline. This is the date, and some of us we're trying to schedule exam. Any tips on how to maintain the motivation and it may not be a big push like a week or two before exam, but how can we keep our mind sharp and not forgetting what we studied, say, 2-3 months ago?
The only way I know how to do that consistently is to make sure that people register for the exam before they start studying. Just register for all the exams. Then you have a deadline. And for a lot of you guys, I can just sense you cringing because I tell this to people's faces and they shrink, like they actually get smaller when I say it to them. But I think that is the single most important advice I could give people in terms of motivation and getting through these. I mean, on average, it takes people 2.2 years between when they take their first exam and when they pass their last exam. And that's only the subset of people who get licensed. There's lots of people who take exams and never get licensed. So of the ones who get licensed, on average, it takes 2.2 years. And that's not when they started studying. That's between when they took their first exam. So they might have been studying for 6 months before they took their first exam. And I just don't think that needs to be. I'm not saying these exams are easy. I understand they're difficult. I totally understand they're difficult. And I know that, for some of you, maybe English is a second language. And for that subset of people, man, you guys are getting screwed by these exams. I see it all the time. The wording just throws you off. Um, the and I'm not saying that you should be passing them in less than 2.2 years. I could totally see how it could take someone 3 or 4 years to pass these, especially if you're busy at work and you have a family at home that you need to provide for. That said, I think the fact that the average is 2.2 years from the first exam to passing is way too long. It's way too long. I think that if people started, if the rule was that once you decided to start studying, right away, that same day that you decided to start studying, you scheduled all 6 exams, and that every time you failed an exam, you scheduled it, that you didn't fail miserably, you scheduled another one for 60 days later. If that was the rule, the average would not be anywhere near 2.2 years. I think it would be less than a half a year if that was the rule, and certainly less than a year. So I think the biggest thing is just to schedule the exams. That's the only consistent advice. So everybody go now, and if you can, I know it's a mess, but everybody go now and schedule all of your remaining exams. I'm not joking. I know you smiled when I said that. Schedule all of your remaining exams right now for as soon as as soon as Prometric will let you. And I know that's expensive, but you know what else is expensive? Paying for the Amber Book month after month. And you know what else is expensive? Getting your license a year later when you could have been getting more money for that extra year. And you're going to have to pay for those exams anyway if you want to go through this process. So I cannot stress enough to just schedule those exams. And I know that some of you guys are worried about getting laid off, but when I started teaching these things, it was during the last recession, and I had a lot of laid off people because they had time. So they didn't have money, but they had time. So if you have some money now and you may get laid off later, now is not a bad time for you to schedule those exams so that you can study. I don't want you to think I'm making light of being laid off. That's a huge deal. And hopefully there won't be many of you laid off, and hopefully if you are, everyone will get brought back on pretty soon. I don't think necessarily that kind of financial insecurity is necessarily a good reason to put off taking these exams. I think it may be a good reason to kind of knock them out. Because when you go looking for a job again, and someone says, "What did you do in the last 4 months when you were unemployed?" I think it's great to be able to say, "I passed all my exams, I'm now licensed," or to be able to say, "I built my uncle's deck," or whatever. I renovated a bathroom in my house, or whatever. I just think that everyone should have a process for thinking about how they're gonna use the time in between, if they are in between.
Right. Thank you. Totally agree about registered exam, and I have. So I
Good.
registered it since I failed the last exam, and so the 3 months, 60 days, I have to wait. So, but then with this extension, my exam was supposedly next coming Monday on May 4th. Now I'm going to be in September.
Oh, you're killing me.
Is that I'm studying really hard, and I'm worried that what I'm studying, I'm going to forget them. And
yeah, my advice in that, I mean, you just got a bad break, man. And my advice is go easy on yourself. Really, I mean, go easy on yourself. Like I know I just said like you have to have learned how to play the guitar during the COVID quarantine. Like I made it sound like you have to, But that said, things happen like this, and I think it's good to kind of jump into this. But if it's not fun for you at all, like if it's just pure stress, and it's going to be pure stress until September, because you're worried about forgetting it, then I think you should right now, as soon as you get off this phone call, I think you should go outside and take a walk and sit in a hammock and bring a book and hold someone's hand and just go really easy on yourself, because this happened to you. Like it just happened to you, and I don't think that you should be miserable for 6 months because of it. I would hate to see that happen to anyone.